Imagine a warm, quiet summer night, the kind where the air hangs heavy and still, and every little sound seems to echo. That's where our story begins. Anna had just moved into her new house, an old Victorian place with creaky floors and a history longer than a CVS receipt. It was her first night alone. Her boyfriend was out of town for work, and she was excited to enjoy some much-needed solitude. Anna wasn't your typical scaredy cat. She loved horror movies and ghost stories, often laughing at how easily people got spooked. But tonight, there was an uneasy feeling she couldn't shake off. The house, with its antique furniture and dim lighting, seemed to breathe around her. The wind howled outside, causing the old windows to rattle and groan. She brushed it off, chalking it up to the house's age. As the clock struck midnight, Anna decided to unwind with a glass of wine and a good book. She wrapped herself in a cozy blanket and settled into the living room, the flickering candlelight casting eerie shadows on the walls. Just as she was getting lost in her novel, she heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from the front door. Now, this was the middle of nowhere. Who could possibly be knocking at this hour? Curiosity piqued, Anna hesitated but decided to check. As she approached the door, the tapping grew louder, more insistent. Her heart raced, pounding in her chest like a drum. She peered through the peephole but saw nothing. The porch light flickered, adding to the unsettling vibe. Taking a deep breath, she unlocked the door and opened it just a crack. There was no one there. Anna's heart started to slow, and she almost laughed at herself for getting spooked over nothing. But then, something caught her eye. Footprints. Wet, muddy footprints leading from the edge of the porch straight to the door. She hadn't heard any rain, nor was there any mud around. She felt a chill run down her spine. Closing the door quickly, she locked it and turned on all the lights, suddenly feeling exposed in the dark. The tapping started again, this time louder, and now it was coming from the windows. She ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and backed herself into a corner. The noise moved from one window to the next, methodically circling the house. Her phone was dead, charging in the bedroom, and she cursed herself for not bringing it downstairs. Anna's mind raced. Was it a prank? A neighbor messing around? But she knew her neighbors, and they wouldn't do something like this. The tapping stopped as suddenly as it had started. The silence was deafening, stretching out for what felt like an eternity. She strained her ears, listening for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just when she thought it was over, there was a loud bang from the back of the house. Anna jumped, her grip tightening on the knife. She inched her way to the kitchen window, peeking through the curtains. Her blood ran cold. There, standing at the back door, was a figure. It was tall, with a distorted, shadowy face, and it was staring directly at her. Anna's mind screamed for her to run, but her body wouldn't move. She watched in horror as the figure lifted a hand and tapped on the glass. The sound was sharp and deliberate. Anna's breath hitched as she locked eyes with the figure. Her heart pounded like a jackhammer, the blood rushing in her ears, making it hard to think. The figure's hand continued to tap, a slow, rhythmic beat that sent shivers down her spine. She knew she had to do something, but her feet felt like they were cemented to the floor. Then, as if a switch flipped, the figure stopped tapping and moved away from the window, disappearing into the shadows of the backyard. Anna blinked, trying to process what had just happened. Her brain screamed for her to grab her phone, call the police, do anything. But she was paralyzed with fear. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. Minutes felt like hours as she stood there, knife still clutched in her trembling hand. Gathering every ounce of courage, she darted to the living room to grab her phone. The battery icon flashed, only 2%. She swiped to unlock it, hands shaking, and quickly dialed 911. Just as the call connected, she heard it, a slow, deliberate creak from the front of the house. Her eyes darted to the door, then back to the screen. The operator's voice was a distant echo in her ears as she tried to speak, but her mouth felt dry. "Someone's here," she finally managed to whisper. "Please, send help." As she provided her address, the doorknob slowly began to turn. Anna's heart stopped. She stared at the door, phone pressed to her ear, waiting for the nightmare to end. Then, the door burst open. There was nothing, just the dark, empty porch and the cool night air blowing in. Her pulse raced as she stepped back, trying to make sense of it all. The operator was still speaking, but Anna barely registered the words. She backed away from the door, closing it and locking it once more. Her eyes flicked around the room, searching for any sign of the intruder. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the kitchen, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Anna's scream lodged in her throat as she turned to see the figure standing by the broken window, a large shard of glass in its hand. It stepped through the opening, moving with an unnatural grace, eyes locked on hers. This was it. Fight or flight. Anna felt her body go numb as adrenaline surged through her veins. She raised the knife, pointing it at the intruder. "Stay back!" she yelled, her voice cracking. The figure paused, tilting its head as if considering her words. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then, with a swift movement, it lunged at her. Anna stumbled back, tripping over the coffee table and falling to the floor. The figure loomed over her, the glass shard glinting in the dim light. She swung the knife wildly, catching the figure's arm. It recoiled, letting out a guttural noise, somewhere between a growl and a scream. She took the opportunity to scramble to her feet and sprint toward the stairs. The figure was right behind her, its footsteps heavy and menacing. She reached the top of the stairs and threw herself into the bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She glanced around the room, looking for anything she could use to defend herself. The door shook as the figure pounded on it, each blow making Anna wince. She grabbed a heavy lamp from the bedside table, holding it up like a makeshift weapon. The door began to splinter under the force of the blows, and Anna knew it wouldn't hold much longer. Then, just as the door seemed ready to give way, she heard sirens in the distance. The pounding stopped. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of hurried footsteps retreating down the stairs. Anna rushed to the window and saw flashing lights approaching. Relief washed over her, but she didn't let go of the lamp. Not yet. The police arrived, and Anna could see them sweeping the area, but the figure was gone. They found no sign of forced entry other than the broken window, no footprints, nothing. As the officers questioned her, Anna realized she couldn't even describe the intruder's face. It was as if the whole encounter had been a blurry nightmare. But it wasn't. She knew what she'd seen, what she'd felt. As she sat in the police car, watching the flashing lights dance across her front yard, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that whoever or whatever had visited her that night wasn't finished. The house felt different now, like it was holding secrets in its old walls, secrets that were far from over. What do you think? Who or what could have been knocking on Anna's door that eerie night? Was it just a prank, or is there something darker at play? Have you ever had a similar experience where someone or something unsettling paid you a visit? Let me know in the comments. And if this story hooked you, stay tuned. The next one will pull you even deeper into the darkness. I promise, it's going to get even more intense. Meet Jake, a 28-year-old graphic designer living in a sleek, modern apartment complex in the heart of the city. It was a typical Friday night, and Jake had just wrapped up a busy week of work. His girlfriend was out of town for a conference, leaving him alone to enjoy a weekend of uninterrupted gaming and junk food. The city was alive with noise, but Jake's apartment, perched high above the streets, was a bubble of quiet solitude. As the evening set in, Jake settled on the couch, headphones on, fully immersed in a competitive online game. The only light came from the glow of his monitors and the occasional flash of neon signs outside his window. He was in the zone, battling enemies and coordinating with teammates, when his phone buzzed, pulling him back to reality. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Jake usually ignored calls from unknown numbers, but something about this one piqued his curiosity. He took off his headphones and answered. "Hello?" Silence. Jake frowned, glancing at the caller ID again. "Hello?" he repeated. There was a faint sound on the other end, like someone breathing. It sent a chill down his spine. He hung up, shrugging it off as a prank call. He was about to dive back into his game when the phone rang again. Same number. This time, annoyance crept in. "Who's this?" he demanded. Again, only silence, followed by a soft chuckle. The hair on Jake's neck stood on end. The chuckle was low, almost inaudible, but there was something deeply unsettling about it. He hung up, his mood thoroughly spoiled. He decided to ignore the phone and continued his game, but he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. It felt as if someone was watching him. Jake was not easily spooked, but the silence in the apartment seemed to press in around him. He glanced at the window, half expecting to see a face staring back at him, but there was nothing. The phone rang again. Jake hesitated, his finger hovering over the decline button. Curiosity got the better of him, and he picked up. Before he could speak, the voice on the other end whispered, "I see you." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He jumped up, scanning the room. His pulse quickened, adrenaline flooding his system. "Who the hell is this?" he shouted, but the line went dead. He felt a prickle of fear. Something was definitely off. He double-checked the locks on his door and windows, trying to calm the storm brewing inside him. As he paced the room, his phone buzzed with a new text message. He opened it and felt his blood run cold. The message was a picture of him, sitting on the couch, taken from outside his window. The angle was unmistakable. It was recent, within the last few minutes. Panic surged through him. He rushed to the window and yanked the curtain shut, his mind racing. Who was doing this? And how did they know where he lived? Just as he was about to call the police, another message came in. "Come out and play, Jake." His hands trembled as he dialed 911. As he explained the situation to the dispatcher, he heard a soft thump from the hallway outside his apartment. Jake went silent, straining to listen. The thump came again, louder this time, followed by a dragging sound. The dispatcher assured him that help was on the way, but Jake felt trapped. He grabbed a kitchen knife, the only weapon he could think of, and backed away from the door. The noises outside grew closer, now accompanied by a faint scratching, like nails on a chalkboard. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. What if the police didn't get there in time? The scratching stopped, replaced by a chilling silence. Jake held his breath, the knife shaking in his hand. The minutes felt like hours. Then, the silence was shattered by a loud, deliberate knock on his door. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The knock was steady, almost polite, but in the tense silence of his apartment, it sounded like thunder. He gripped the knife tighter, his knuckles turning white. Whoever was on the other side of that door wasn't going away. The polite knock came again, this time followed by a voice, calm, collected, and eerily familiar. "Jake, come on out, let's talk." Jake's mind raced. How did this person know his name, his location? He glanced at his phone, still connected to the 911 dispatcher. "Someone's at my door," he whispered, barely able to speak. The dispatcher told him to stay calm and that the police were minutes away, but Jake could barely hear her over the pounding in his ears. The voice on the other side of the door continued, sounding almost amused. "I know you're scared, Jake, but there's no need to be. I just want to talk." Jake backed away from the door, his eyes darting around the apartment. He felt cornered, his mind screaming at him to run, hide, do anything. But where? The only exit was through the front door, where the voice was coming from. He glanced at the window, considering the drop. They were on the 4th floor, too high to jump without risking serious injury. The voice spoke again, softer this time. "Jake, we don't have much time. They're coming. You know who I mean, don't you?" Jake's blood turned to ice. The words made no sense, yet they were filled with a strange certainty that unnerved him. He wanted to scream, to yell at this stranger to leave him alone, but fear paralyzed him. Then, the door handle jiggled, and the calm voice became more insistent. "Let me in, Jake. It's the only way you'll be safe." A sharp knock, more urgent this time, rattled the door. Jake's eyes widened in terror. What if the person outside could break in? He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves, and called out, "The police are on their way. Leave now or you'll be sorry." There was a pause, followed by a chilling chuckle. Jake, the police can't help you. No one can." At that moment, red and blue lights flashed through the thin curtains of his window, casting the room in a surreal glow. Relief washed over Jake as he heard the faint sound of sirens growing louder. The knocking stopped, and the voice outside fell silent. He rushed to the window, peeking through a small gap in the curtain. 2 police cars pulled up, officers stepping out with flashlights drawn. Jake ran to the door, his fingers fumbling with the lock in his haste to open it. He threw the door open, expecting to see his tormentor. But the hallway was empty. He looked around frantically, but there was no sign of the mysterious caller. Just as he was about to step out, a police officer rounded the corner, flashlight beam cutting through the dim corridor. "Sir, are you okay?" the officer asked, looking concerned. Jake nodded, still in shock. "Someone was here. They knew things about me. They said..." His voice faltered as he struggled to explain the bizarre encounter. The officer put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Let's take you downstairs and get a statement. We need to secure the area." As they made their way to the elevator, Jake felt a strange sense of disbelief, like waking up from a nightmare that had somehow bled into reality. He kept looking over his shoulder, half expecting the voice to call out to him again. But there was nothing. The police searched the building and reviewed the security footage. To Jake's horror, the cameras showed nothing unusual. No one had approached his door, no one had knocked. It was as if the whole thing had been a figment of his imagination. But Jake knew what he'd heard and seen. The voice, the knocks, the picture of him in his apartment. Shaken and exhausted, Jake was left with more questions than answers. Who had called him, and how did they know so much? And more disturbingly, where had they gone? As the officers left, assuring him they would continue to investigate, Jake felt a cold knot of fear settle in his stomach. He knew one thing for sure: whoever or whatever had visited him that night wasn't finished. If you want to see more horror stories, check out my next video,